The year is 1942. The Eastern Front stretches across thousands of miles, a landscape of frozen rivers, burned villages, and mass graves. The German Wehrmacht, once considered unstoppable, has advanced deep into Soviet territory. Millions are already dead. But now, the German war machine is turning its eyes toward a single city: Stalingrad, on the banks of the Volga River. A name that would become synonymous with human suffering, relentless resistance, and total destruction. This is not the sanitized version of war often told in history books. This is the uncensored reality. Streets turned into graveyards, civilians starving in cellars, soldiers fighting hand-to-hand in rubble. Stalingrad was not just a battle. It was a descent into hell. Hitler's obsession. Why Stalingrad? The road to the Volga. By the summer of 1942, Hitler believed he was on the verge of victory. Germany had conquered much of Europe. His armies swept across the Soviet Union, taking vast territories. Now he sought the oil fields of the Caucasus, essential for fueling his tanks and aircraft. But one obstacle stood in the way: Stalingrad, a major industrial hub producing weapons and supplies for the Red Army. To Hitler, taking the city would cripple the Soviets' war effort. But there was more. The city bore the name of his greatest enemy, Joseph Stalin. Capturing Stalingrad was not only strategic, it was personal. To Hitler, conquering Stalin's city would be the ultimate humiliation. Stalin's order. Stalin knew what was at stake. He issued order number 227, not one step back. Retreat was forbidden. Soldiers who fled faced execution. Stalingrad was to be defended at any cost, even if it meant every soldier, every civilian, every brick of the city. Second, the siege begins. Fire from the sky. On August 23, 1942, the Luftwaffe unleashed hell. Over 1,000 German bombers reduced much of Stalingrad to ash. Civilians were torn apart by explosions, buried alive in rubble, burned in their homes. Survivors later described the city as a sea of fire. Streets glowed red at night. Asphalt melted. Families suffocated in shelters as flames consumed the air. In just one day, tens of thousands of civilians died. Rare footage from German and Soviet archives shows black smoke rising in massive plumes, children wandering the ruins in shock, and endless columns of refugees trudging toward the Volga. Civilians trapped in hell. Despite evacuation attempts, tens of thousands of civilians remained. They hid in basements, cellars, and factories as the battle raged overhead. Mothers clutched infants while bombs shook the ground. Children starved in the cold. One diary found in the ruins contained a haunting line: "The earth trembles day and night. We have no bread. The children cry. If there is a God, he has left Stalingrad." Third street-to-street warfare, house-to-house combat. The Germans believed Stalingrad would fall within weeks. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Soviet troops fought for every building, every staircase, every hallway. Historians call this urban warfare. The soldiers called it the meat grinder. German film reels show squads advancing cautiously through shattered apartments, rifles raised. Around every corner could be a Soviet ambush. A kitchen became a fortress. A stairwell became a killing zone. Pavlov's House 1 apartment block became legendary. Pavlov's house. Defended by a small Soviet garrison led by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, it withstood repeated German assaults for nearly 2 months. The defenders wired the building with mines, set up machine guns in windows, and survived under constant bombardment. German survivors later admitted they lost more men attacking Pavlov's house than they had taking entire cities in France. Snipers of Stalingrad. Among the ruins, Soviet snipers turned the city into a hunting ground. Vasily Zaitsev, one of the most famous, killed over 200 Germans during the battle. He and other snipers became symbols of Soviet resilience. The Germans responded by sending their own sharpshooters. Duels played out across ruined factories and collapsed rooftops. To be spotted meant death. Soldiers moved like ghosts, crawling through debris, waiting for a single shot. Fourth life in the ruins. Soldiers and civilians. Side by side inside the city, the line between soldier and civilian blurred. Civilians carried ammunition, dug trenches, and cared for the wounded. Children acted as scouts. Women joined the fight, armed with rifles or Molotov cocktails. Rare Soviet reels show families huddled in bombed-out cellars, cooking scraps of horse meat over makeshift fires while artillery shook the walls. Hunger and desperation. Food was scarce. Soldiers boiled leather belts and boots to survive. Civilians gnawed on rats. Corpses lay frozen in the snow, unburied, serving as grim reminders of what awaited those still alive. Letters recovered from German soldiers reveal the same desperation. One wrote, "We fight not for the Führer now, but for a crust of bread. The Russians do not stop. They come like shadows. God help us." Fee. The turning point, Operation Uranus. The trap closes. By November 1942, the Soviets prepared a massive counterattack. Operation Uranus. Soviet armies struck north and south of Stalingrad, encircling the German Sixth Army. Nearly 300,000 German and Axis soldiers were trapped. Rare footage shows Soviet T-34 tanks plowing through snow, infantry advancing with determination, artillery firing in endless barrages. The hunter had become the hunted. The frozen prison. As winter deepened, the German situation became hopeless. Supplies were flown in, but never enough. Frostbite blackened fingers and toes. Soldiers burned furniture for heat. Horses were slaughtered for food. A German officer described it bluntly. "We live like animals. We eat anything. We freeze, we starve, and we wait for death." 6. The final days, Hitler's refusal. Hitler demanded that the Sixth Army fight to the last man. Retreat was forbidden. He promoted General Friedrich Paulus to Field Marshal, pointing out that no German field marshal had ever surrendered. The message was clear: die with honor. But the starving, broken soldiers could no longer fight. On January 31, 1943, Paulus surrendered. The end of the Sixth Army. Out of nearly 300,000 men, only about 90,000 surrendered alive. Most were skeletal, barely able to walk. Of these, only a few thousand would ever return to Germany. Rare Soviet reels show endless columns of prisoners stumbling through snow, guarded by Red Army soldiers. Many collapsed and never rose again. Victory at a price. For the Soviets, the Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point, a symbol of resilience and eventual triumph. For Germany, it was a catastrophic disaster that shattered the myth of invincibility. But the cost was staggering. More than 1 million Soviet soldiers and civilians lost their lives, while nearly 800,000 Axis troops were killed, wounded, or captured. The city itself was obliterated. By 1943, Stalingrad had become a graveyard of ruins. Factories without roofs, homes reduced to dust, and frozen corpses lying where they had fallen. 7. Legacy of Stalingrad. A symbol of defiance. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became a legend, a symbol of endurance and sacrifice. Stalin himself declared, "Stalingrad will never be erased from the memory of mankind." Survivors' memories. For survivors, soldiers and civilians alike, the memories never faded. The battle was not simply an event they lived through, it became etched into their very being. Soldiers who fought among the ruins carried scars, both visible and invisible, that never healed. Civilians who endured the siege remembered endless hunger, the freezing cold, and the terrifying silence before another round of shelling. One Soviet nurse, decades later, described it with haunting clarity. "When I close my eyes, I still hear the cries. The bombs never stop. Stalingrad lives in my bones." For her, and for millions of others, the city was not just a place on a map. It was a graveyard, a trauma, a symbol of human endurance against unimaginable horror. The echoes of suffering lived on long after the smoke cleared, passed down through generations as both a warning and a reminder of the price of survival. A warning from the ruins. The Battle of Stalingrad was not just a military clash, it was a human catastrophe. It showed the extremes of human endurance, the depths of suffering, and the price of absolute war. Rare, uncensored footage reminds us that behind every statistic lies a face, a family, a final heartbeat. The Volga River still flows. The city, now called Volgograd, has been rebuilt. But beneath its streets lie the bones of hundreds of thousands, silent witnesses to humanity's darkest hours. Stalingrad stands as a warning. When ideology, ego, and obsession consume leaders, it is ordinary people who pay in blood.